A former vice president is taking on the current president. Joe Biden says Mr. Trump, quote, does not understand governance. Those remarks come one day after Joe Biden presented Senator John McCain with the Liberty Medal in Philadelphia. And at that event, McCain offered his own critique of the president. Here's CBS News Chief Congressional Correspondent Nancy Cordes.
It is absolutely bizarre. This bizarre conduct.
After holding back for 9 months, the former vice president unloaded today for a scathing 7 minutes.
We have a president who does not understand governance. Forget his policies for a minute. He doesn't understand how the government functions.
He said the president's behavior and language
get that son of a bitch off the field
are rapidly and perhaps irreversibly shattering societal standards.
Violating the norms of personal conduct generates more anxiety and fear than any policy prescription that this president has enunciated.
Still, he begged top officials not to abandon ship.
All the people who are in our administration who are still there, they call me all the time. I say, please stay. Please stay. There has to be some competence and normalcy. But again,
his note of alarm echoed comments made by Republican Senator John McCain, who described Mr. Trump's politics this way today.
Well, it's a reversion to the 1930s, the isolationism that brought on World War II.
And this way last night.
Some half-baked, spurious nationalism cooked up by people who would rather find scapegoats than solve problems.
President Trump was asked about that in a radio interview.
You heard what he said yesterday, Senator McCain.
Yeah, well, I hear it, and people have to be careful because at some point I fight back.
Yeah.
You know, I'm being very nice. I'm being very, very nice. But at some point I fight back, and it won't be pretty.
McCain insisted he wants to work with President Trump, but Vice President Biden said he is done giving this president the benefit of the doubt. He told the audience, Elaine, that he has heard from 14 different heads of state, all of them wanting to understand what is going on in the United States.
Wow, Nancy, that's very revealing. How unusual is it, just give us some context here, for a former vice president to weigh in on the governance of a sitting president?
Well, there's no official protocol, but what you've seen in modern times is that once presidents and vice presidents leave office, they tend to really give the new team that's in the White House a pretty wide berth. And try to think of a time when former President George W. Bush weighed in on what President Obama was doing, and you'd be pretty hard-pressed. In fact, sometimes there's an interesting understanding that develops because even if they don't share the same politics, they share the same experience and can understand one another and the pressures that they're facing better than almost anyone else can. In this situation, Vice President Biden, who is, of course, known for being someone who doesn't hold back and always says what he thinks, it probably took some Herculean effort for him to not say anything these past 9 months. And you've seen President Obama really bite his tongue as well and decline to weigh in on all manner of both policy and political issues over the past almost year. And so the fact that Vice President Biden, who wasn't even really asked about President Trump today on that stage, he was asked a much more general question, what would you do if you were president right now? And he started to answer that question, but after a couple of minutes, clearly there was a lot that he had on his mind, and he just laid into President Trump.
Well, Nancy, what is it that you're hearing about Senator McCain's remarks? He says that he wants to continue to work with the president, but wouldn't his statements interfere with that goal?
Well, you would think, but, his friend Lindsey Graham has made similarly critical statements about President Trump, and they went golfing just this weekend. So it does appear that President Trump is able to forgive and forget when it comes time to work with people in his party who he needs or who believe that they need him. Clearly, there is an enmity that goes deeper with John McCain than most other members of the president's party. It was about 2 years ago that Donald Trump first said that he likes people who were not captured and doesn't consider John McCain a hero, and the relationship has been pretty rocky ever since. But part of the circumstances here are the fact that John McCain clearly feels that he has more leeway than other members of his party to say what's on his mind. I know for a fact that there are a number of Republicans who share his concerns about sort of the populist rhetoric that's employed by this president, a lot of his behavior, but they feel constrained by politics and by the fact that their base overlaps quite a bit with the president's. John McCain clearly doesn't feel those same kind of restraints.
Clearly. Well, meanwhile, Tennessee Senator Lamar Alexander and Senator Patty Murray of Washington say they've reached a tentative deal to extend payments to insurers for 2 years under the Affordable Care Act. What can you tell us about that?
Well, this is pretty notable for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's the first time that Republican and Democratic leaders have come to any kind of agreement on improving, fixing, whatever word you want to use, the Affordable Care Act since it was passed about 7 years ago. And so the fact that Alexander and Murray were able to come up with this agreement, it's not a major agreement, it doesn't cover everything that they wanted to tackle, but it does extend these payments for 2 years. And it does put money into promoting the Affordable Care Act and open enrollment so people actually sign up after the administration pulled those funds. That is a pretty serious accomplishment. And the fact that the president last week announced that he was no longer going to authorize those payments to the insurance industry, which comes to about $7 billion every year. It's meant to bring down costs for people on the individual market. That really lit a fire under these negotiations here on Capitol Hill. And members are still absorbing the agreement. Too early to say whether it'll have the support it needs to pass. But so far, the signals that we've been getting from a bunch of Democrats and some Republicans is that they think it's an interesting deal. And they certainly recognize the kind of disruption that could happen in the individual market if suddenly these massive payments that the insurance industry relies on every year are pulled.
Finally, Nancy, in the face of growing pressure, Pennsylvania Congressman Tom Marino withdrew Tuesday as President Trump's nominee to be drug czar. This follows a 60 Minutes Washington Post report that revealed the congressman's role in legislation, which critics say actually ties the hands of the DEA and its enforcement powers. What is the reaction to on Capitol Hill to this development of the withdrawal of Tom Marino?
Well, you had a lot of Democrats and a bunch of Republicans as well saying that this was the right move. And Republicans said, look, even if Marino didn't do anything wrong, even if just the perception is out there without basis, in fact, that he worked with the drug industry to craft this legislation, they said it still doesn't look good for the person who wants to be the drug czar, the figurehead for the administration when it comes to cracking down on drug abuse. And so for Marino to tell the president that he wanted to step down was something that was clearly hoped for, anticipated here on Capitol Hill, and apparently at the White House as well, because it was this morning, just about 24, 36 hours after this story first broke on 60 Minutes and in the Washington Post, that the president was announcing on Twitter that Marino was withdrawing his nomination, even as the president and the vice president went out of their way to say that Marino is a good person and he's a good man and he's a good representative for his district in Pennsylvania.
Fast-moving developments. Nancy Cortez, thanks so much, Nancy.
You're welcome.
Late Tuesday, Congressman Marino put out a statement saying he did not want to be a distraction. He also denied the allegations of the whistleblower in the 60 Minutes report and criticized the news media. He said in part, quote, "I find it sad and disheartening that the news media have left behind any concept of balanced reporting and credited conspiracy theories from individuals seeking to avert blame from their own failures to address the opioid crisis that proliferated during their tenure."